My name is Margaret Collins, and at 58 years old, I finally understood the quiet joy of a dream long deferred, a yearning for sanctuary that had echoed through decades of a life lived for others. For so long, the very idea of a home, a true haven that was undeniably mine, felt like a distant whisper, an American dream perpetually just beyond my grasp, obscured by the needs of family, the responsibilities of motherhood, and the quiet sacrifices that often define a woman's journey. I had spent countless years pouring my heart into homes that were never truly mine, always shared, always with an unspoken lease on my emotional and physical space. There's a particular ache, isn't there, in continually giving, in nurturing, in building foundations for others, while your own foundations remain unlaid, your own sacred space an abstract concept. If you've ever felt that subtle erosion of self, that slow diminishment of your own desires in the relentless tide of obligation, then you understand the depth of emotion that swelled within me when I finally held the keys to my own little cottage in the serene, whispering woods of Minnesota. Subscribe to our channel. This is just the beginning. It wasn't a grand estate, no sprawling mansion overlooking manicured lawns, but a humble, perfectly imperfect abode, a testament to perseverance, a beacon of hope for anyone who believes that some dreams simply take a little longer to bloom, but are no less vibrant for their delay. Every creak of its aged floorboards, every sunbeam that danced through its modest windows, felt like a personal triumph, a melody of independence after a lifetime of orchestrated demands. I pictured quiet mornings with a steaming cup of tea, the gentle rustle of leaves outside, the uncomplicated rhythm of days spent in peaceful solitude, surrounded only by the echoes of my own choosing. And in the corner of my small living room sat an old, slightly out-of-tune piano, a relic from my late husband Robert. It wasn't there for grand concerts or perfect melodies. It was there because I chose it to be, a symbol of the freedom to keep something just for the sheer, unadulterated joy of having it, even with its imperfections. This wasn't just a house. It was a promise to myself, a silent vow to reclaim the dignity of my own space, to finally breathe freely in a sanctuary earned through years of tireless effort and often unspoken longing. It was the culmination of countless early mornings, late nights, careful budgeting, and the quiet resilience of a spirit that refused to be extinguished. It was everything I had ever wanted for myself, a refuge to mend a soul weary from the relentless demands of a life spent prioritizing everyone else. Can you imagine that feeling? The profound, almost overwhelming sense of peace, the fragile bloom of a happiness so pure it felt like a secret you could barely whisper aloud? That was me, Margaret Collins. Just 3 days after signing those papers, after finally setting foot into the home that was irrevocably and beautifully mine. 3 days of savoring that unprecedented quiet, that sweet, intoxicating freedom. 3 days of imagining a life where my boundaries were respected, where my space was sacred, where my peace was paramount. I was 58 and the world felt for the very first time entirely my own. And then the phone rang. It wasn't a gentle chime, but a jarring, insistent demand that shattered the delicate illusion of tranquility I had just begun to build. My daughter Melissa. Her voice, brisk and utterly devoid of preamble, sliced through the quiet like a dull knife. "Mom," she announced, not asked, "we're coming to stay. About 20 of us. We'll be there in a couple of days. 20 people. 20. In my tiny cottage." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, instantly eclipsing the fragile light of my newfound independence. 20 people arriving in 2 days, to the home I had just claimed as my own sanctuary, the very embodiment of my long-awaited peace. The shock wasn't just in the numbers or the audacity, but in the complete disregard, the assumption that my space, my needs, my newly minted dream, were entirely secondary to her whim, to the collective expectation of family. It was a familiar pattern, a painful echo from a past I desperately hoped to leave behind, where my desires were consistently overridden by the unyielding currents of familial expectation. For the first time in years, I woke up in silence in a house that was mine alone. Not the strained, expectant silence of a shared space, where every breath feels monitored, every movement anticipated, but a deep, profound quietude that hummed with peace. It was a silence that allowed me to truly hear myself, to feel the gentle rhythm of my own heart, a sensation that had been muted, almost entirely lost for far too long. This was not merely the absence of noise. It was the presence of my own unbroken thoughts, the luxury of an existence unburdened by the constant demands and unspoken judgments of others. I stretched slowly, luxuriously, letting the morning sun warm my face through the small window, a sunbeam that felt like a personal blessing, a ray of hope after years spent in the literal and figurative shadows. My husband, Robert, had passed away 6 years prior, a quiet fading after a long illness that left an aching void in my life, a void that was soon filled not with solace but with a different kind of emptiness. After his death, my son Daniel, ever the pragmatic one, had offered me his basement. "Just temporarily, Mom," he'd said, his voice laced with that well-meaning but ultimately hollow assurance. "Until you get back on your feet." And for a grieving widow, reeling from loss and uncertain of her next step, it seemed like a lifeline. A temporary solution that, as temporary solutions often do, cemented itself into a permanent fixture. 6 years. 6 years passed in that subterranean space, a twilight existence where the natural light was a luxury, and the sounds of life above were a constant, inescapable reminder of my diminished status. The routine quickly solidified into a slow, grinding humiliation. My days became an extension of their household chores, an unpaid, unacknowledged domestic service. "Mom, could you just run a load of laundry for the kids?" was not a question, but a daily directive, often followed by a pile of unceremoniously dumped clothes at my basement door. "Mom, are you making lunch today? The kids are hungry." My cooking, once a source of joy and creative expression, became another obligation, an expectation never met with a word of thanks, never a genuine appreciation. I cooked, I cleaned, I ironed, I folded, I became the silent, ever-present help, a ghost in my own son's house. The grandchildren, bless their innocent hearts, learned quickly to see me as the person who provided, who served, rather than the grandmother who deserved respect and cherished moments. There were no leisurely chats, no shared stories. Only requests, always requests, framed as casual suggestions but carrying the weight of command. My presence, once valued, had been reduced to utility. The contrast with my new life, this hard-won independence, was breathtaking, almost dizzying in its purity. This house, though small, was undeniably beautiful to my eyes. A cozy, unpretentious cottage nestled on the edge of a serene lake, its waters reflecting the endless Minnesota sky. The view from my porch was a living painting, changing with every season, a constant source of quiet wonder. Here, every corner whispered of my choices, my tastes, my very being. The walls were painted in colors I had chosen, the furniture arranged exactly as I wished, each piece a carefully considered element in my personal sanctuary. And in the corner of my small living room sat an old, slightly out-of-tune piano, a relic from my late husband Robert. It wasn't there for grand concerts or perfect melodies. It was there because I chose it to be. Its worn keys and muted tones were a symbol of the freedom to keep something just for the sheer, unadulterated joy of having it, even with its imperfections, without needing it to serve any purpose beyond its quiet presence. This house was not just a structure. It was the embodiment of a second chance, a quiet revolution, a long-awaited homecoming to myself. It was my space, my rules, my peace, finally mine to define and defend. That profound, hard-won silence didn't last long. It was fragile, a delicate glass bubble that shattered with the shrill, insistent ring of my phone on the third day. I didn't even need to glance at the screen. There was an almost primal recognition in the insistent vibration, a premonition that only one person in my life called with such an immediate, unyielding demand for attention. Only Melissa called like that, her name a silent, almost dreaded pre-echo in my mind before I even saw it displayed. My heart, which had just begun to settle into a rhythm of peace, lurched, a cold, unwelcome tremor spreading through my chest. I knew instinctively that whatever peace I had found was about to be severely tested, perhaps irrevocably broken. Her voice, when I finally answered, was exactly as I had anticipated, brisk, devoid of any warmth or preamble, cutting straight to the point with an almost surgical precision that always left me feeling as though I had been dissected. "Mom," she stated, not asked, the word a pronouncement, "we're almost there. The entire family. About 20 of us, maybe more now. We just passed the state line. Is the house ready?" There was no, "How are you, Mom?" No, "Is this a good time?" No consideration whatsoever for the delicate balance of my new existence. It was a declaration, a unilateral decision delivered as an unassailable fact, assuming my complete and unquestioning compliance. 20 people. Maybe more. The numbers swelled in my mind, an overwhelming tide threatening to engulf the small island of my sanctuary. My carefully constructed peace began to crumble under the weight of her words, under the sheer, unthinking audacity of her assumption. My little haven, designed for one, was about to be overrun by a stampede of oblivious relatives. Within hours, the quiet, winding lane leading to my cottage was choked with a procession of vehicles. SUVs, their tires spitting gravel, minivans overflowing with children and luggage, and even a couple of enormous pickup trucks, all pulling up in a chaotic caravan that felt less like a visit and more like an invasion. The sudden clamor was deafening. Car doors slamming, children's excited screams, the booming laughter of adults, all blending into a jarring symphony that assaulted the tranquility I had so cherished. Before I could even fully grasp the reality, they were spilling out, a human torrent that swept past me through my front door and into every corner of my small sacred space. They spread through the house like a fast-moving current, each person claiming territory without so much as a glance in my direction. My modest living room, a space I had envisioned for quiet contemplation, instantly became a boisterous command center, bags strewn everywhere, shoes kicked off without a care. The bedrooms, painstakingly prepared for a single occupant, were invaded, bodies piling into beds, makeshift sleeping arrangements appearing with startling speed, as if my home were a public dormitory. One of my nieces, a teenager I barely recognized, strode directly into my kitchen, swung open my refrigerator door without a word, and peered inside with an air of proprietary judgment. "Is this all there is, Aunt Margaret?" she asked, her voice dripping with casual disdain, as if my carefully stocked provisions were an insult. Another relative, my nephew Ethan, was already loudly demanding the Wi-Fi password, his eyes glued to his phone, oblivious to the fact that he was essentially a trespasser in my new home. "Aunt Margaret, the Wi-Fi. I need it now," he barked, as if I were a hotel concierge rather than his aunt and the owner of the house. The bathrooms, small and functional, immediately became a source of loud complaint. "Mom, there's only one shower that really works well," I overheard my daughter Melissa declare to her husband, her voice resonating through the thin walls, implying that the deficiencies of my home were somehow my fault, a personal affront to their comfort. My carefully chosen, modest towels were used, then discarded. Soap, shampoo, all my personal items were treated as communal property, left uncapped, used liberally, and forgotten. My beautiful new home, my haven, rapidly transformed into a chaotic, impersonal hostel, its every surface bearing the imprint of their careless occupancy. I stood there, a silent observer in my own living room, my heart sinking with each passing moment, each thoughtless action. I was not the owner of this space. I was a mere afterthought, an inconvenient presence, treated as nothing more than a temporary, silently suffering guest in my very own home. The injustice of it all, the sheer, unbridled humiliation, burned like a slow, festering ember within me. This was not a visit. It was an annexation. And my carefully constructed world, my long-awaited peace, lay in ruins around me. That night, after the cacophony of their day had finally, mercifully, subsided into a restless, unfamiliar quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. The house, usually so still and resonant with my own thoughts, now merely echoed with the muffled sounds of 20 sleeping bodies, a symphony of snores, whispers, and the distant creak of overused floorboards. It was a silence that offered no comfort, only a stark reminder of the vibrant peace that had been so brutally usurped. The faint smell of stale food, the lingering sweetness of spilled juice, and the general disarray that clung to every surface of my once pristine kitchen were suffocating. My eyes, weary and burning, scanned the remnants of their invasion. A sticky ring on my polished wood, a discarded wrapper, a half-empty glass. Each item was a tiny, persistent stab at the heart of my sanctuary. I picked up a pen, its familiar weight a small anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. For a long moment, I simply stared at the blank yellow page, the simple lines on the paper seeming to mock the complex, tangled lines that defined my life. All those years, all those decades spent bending, accommodating, sacrificing. The endless adjustments, the perpetual understanding, the quiet erosion of my own needs for the sake of familial harmony that never truly materialized. The memory of Daniel's basement, those 6 long years, resurfaced with a stinging clarity. The subtle indignities, the unspoken expectations, the gradual transformation from cherished mother to unpaid domestic help. I had accepted it then, told myself it was temporary, told myself I was helping, told myself it was what a good mother did. But what had it truly cost me? My voice. My space. My very sense of self. The ache in my chest was not just exhaustion. It was a profound, guttural sorrow for the woman I had allowed myself to become, for the dreams I had let wither, for the boundaries I had allowed to be trampled, not just by my children, but by my own reluctance to assert them. I had always been the flexible one, the understanding one, the one who would just make it work. And what had that flexibility earned me? A life spent as an afterthought, an accessory, always available but rarely truly seen. My hand trembled slightly as I finally drew a bold, unwavering line down the middle of the legal pad. A simple, stark division. It felt like an act of rebellion, a small yet powerful declaration of war against the complacency of my own past. On one side I wrote, supplies. On the other, county laws and rules/lodging agreement. The words themselves were mundane, practical, but the act of writing them felt monumental, charged with an almost sacred significance. This was not just about the items they were consuming or the noise they were making. This was about something far deeper. The unwritten social contract, the implicit understanding of respect and reciprocity that had been so utterly violated. My carefully planned budget, stretched thin to achieve this dream, was being decimated with a casual disregard that bordered on cruelty. As I stared at that line on the legal pad, a new, fierce resolve began to harden within me. A whisper, then a growing roar in my soul. This time I won't be used. This wasn't anger. It was something colder, more focused, born of years of quiet suffering. It was the quiet, steely resolve of a woman who had finally reached her absolute limit. I had been flexible for decades, stretched and pulled in every direction until I was almost transparent. No more. This house was my last stand, my final frontier. It wasn't just a place to live. It was the symbol of my reclaimed self, my dignity. And I would protect it and myself with every fiber of my being. The battle lines were drawn, not just on a piece of paper but in the deepest parts of my soul. I was done being the silent, accommodating Margaret. A new Margaret was slowly, powerfully, emerging from the shadows of my past, ready to fight for her peace, for her home, for her very right to exist with respect. While they blasted music in the living room, a cacophony of sound vibrating through the very foundations of my small home, I was in the den, not indulging in some quiet evening reading but drafting agreements. The music, a jarring mix of pop and classic rock, was a deliberate act of defiance on their part, a loud declaration of their presence, their ownership of the space. But as their laughter and shouts echoed through the thin walls, I felt a strange calm descending upon me, a focused intensity that had been absent for years. This wasn't impulsive rage. This was the cold, calculated resolve of a woman who had been pushed beyond her limits, who had finally seen with chilling clarity the true nature of her exploitation. My yellow legal pad, now a testament to my burgeoning rebellion, lay open before me, covered in careful notes, bullet points, and the precise language of legal recourse. My fingers, usually accustomed to the gentle tasks of a homemaker, now moved with a newfound purpose, tapping away on my laptop. I wasn't composing emails to friends or browsing recipes. I was meticulously researching local ordinances, scrutinizing guest occupancy laws, and delving into the intricacies of tenant rights, or more accurately, the distinct lack thereof for short-term, uninvited guests. Each click, each search result, felt like gathering an essential weapon in my silent arsenal. I cross-referenced information, printed out relevant sections, highlighting key phrases and clauses that would soon become the pillars of my defense. The irony was not lost on me. While they celebrated their invasion with casual revelry, I was, in the quiet solitude of my small den, constructing the very framework that would lead to their swift and entirely legal eviction. The first step was to establish the commercial nature of their stay, not as a family visit, but as an implied, albeit unacknowledged, transaction. My research revealed that even without a signed agreement, prolonged occupancy, especially when resources were being consumed and services expected, could be viewed through a particular lens. I began drafting what I called a temporary occupancy agreement, detailing daily rates for lodging, charges for excessive utility consumption, and stipulations for property damage. Each clause was carefully worded, objective and dispassionate, stripping away any familial sentiment and exposing the raw, transactional reality of their presence. I remembered every instance of their demands. The open refrigerator, the constant requests for Wi-Fi, the casual complaints about the amenities. All of it was now being meticulously documented, translated into billable items. The next morning, while they were still stirring, slowly emerging from their chaotic slumber, I was already on the phone. My first call was to a local notary public. I explained, in a calm, measured voice, that I needed documents witnessed and formalized, making sure to emphasize the urgency without revealing the full extent of my plan. I then contacted the county office, specifically the department that handled property disputes and local regulations. I feigned a naive curiosity, asking about the rights of homeowners when guests overstay their welcome, when they begin to impose, to consume resources without contribution. The information they provided, delivered with bureaucratic detachment, was precisely what I needed: validation, procedure, and the explicit mention of involving law enforcement for noncompliance. Every conversation was carefully logged, every name, date, and time meticulously recorded in a small, discreet notebook I kept hidden beneath a stack of magazines. As the days bled into each other, each moment of their casual entitlement fueling my resolve, I continued to gather evidence. I started collecting all receipts for groceries and utility bills, making copies and organizing them into a binder. I even began to discreetly record instances of excessive noise and damage on my phone, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need for irrefutable proof. While my family assumed I was simply retreating, perhaps sulking in my den, while they believed my quietness was a sign of resignation, a characteristic capitulation, I was, in fact, laying the groundwork for a strategic counterattack. Each careless act, each dismissive word, each assumption of my unending generosity, only strengthened my conviction. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my boundaries, and my sanctuary. My plan was nearly complete, precise and cold, ready to be unleashed. By the fifth day, my house no longer felt like mine. The air, once crisp with the scent of pine and fresh lake breezes, was now thick with the cloying sweetness of stale food, the metallic tang of unwashed dishes, and a faint, indefinable odor of too many unconcerned bodies. Every surface bore the imprint of their casual occupation: sticky fingerprints on my new countertops, water rings etched into the delicate finish of my end tables, a permanent film of grime coating the once gleaming kitchen floor. The beautiful cottage, my haven, my hard-won sanctuary, had been reduced to a chaotic communal space, a public lounge where personal boundaries were non-existent and respect was a forgotten concept. It was no longer a home. It was a testament to their unchecked entitlement, a monument to my own vanishing peace. The small, carefully curated objects that had filled my home with a sense of personal history and quiet charm were now casualties of their carelessness. A delicate ceramic bird, a gift from Robert, lay in pieces on the floor, swept carelessly from a shelf. My grandmother's antique lace doilies, once pristine, were stained with coffee and sticky juice. A favorite framed photograph, a cherished memory, was cracked, its glass shattered, relegated to a corner as if it were mere refuse. Even my old, out-of-tune piano had muddy footprints on its pedals. Each broken item was not just a material loss. It was a symbolic rupture, a small piece of my spirit being chipped away, carelessly discarded amidst the mounting wreckage. I would find myself staring at these small acts of destruction, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach, the physical manifestation of the emotional damage they inflicted. The noise, a relentless, oppressive blanket, was perhaps the most insidious form of torment. Laughter, once a joyous sound, now grated on my nerves, echoing with a hollow, taunting quality. Children, left largely unsupervised, shrieked and chased each other through the small rooms, their boundless energy leaving a trail of overturned furniture and scattered toys. Teenagers blasted their music at all hours, their earbuds apparently a concept foreign to their collective understanding, the heavy bass thrumming through the floorboards, vibrating through my very bones, denying me any semblance of quiet reflection. There was no escape, no corner where the relentless clamor could not penetrate, no moment of true silence to soothe my frayed nerves. The neighbors, usually so polite and understanding, began to notice. Subtle glances turned into hesitant conversations over the fence. "Everything all right, Margaret?" Mrs. Henderson asked one afternoon, her eyes darting nervously towards the caravan of parked vehicles and the overflowing trash cans. "Seems a little lively over there." Her voice was soft, but the underlying concern, the unspoken judgment, was clear. I mumbled vague assurances, a wave of shame washing over me. My carefully cultivated reputation for quiet dignity, for being a good neighbor, was unraveling before my very eyes, shattered by the very people who claimed to love me. When I tried tentatively to address the mounting expenses, the conversation invariably dissolved into dismissive laughter and hollow promises. "Mom, you worry too much," Melissa exclaimed, waving her hand dismissively when I gently mentioned the skyrocketing electricity bill. "We'll Venmo you later, of course," her cousin Ethan chimed in, a smirk playing on his lips, the words delivered with an air of theatrical generosity that felt utterly condescending. They treated my concerns as quaint, an amusing quirk of an overly anxious older woman. The very idea that they should contribute, that they should acknowledge the tangible cost of their presence, was met with a collective blank stare, followed by the same empty refrain. "Don't be silly, Mom. It's family. We'll take care of it." But taking care of it never meant payment. It meant a dismissive nod, a pat on the arm, and a quick change of subject, leaving me to shoulder the mounting financial burden alone. The indignity of it all was becoming unbearable. To be treated as a live-in maid, a free caterer, a silent, accommodating host, and then to be ridiculed for daring to mention the costs associated with their presence. It was a profound slap in the face. My indignation, which had started as a slow burn, was now a raging inferno within me. Each casual insult, each broken object, each dismissive laugh was chipping away at the last vestiges of my patience, hardening my resolve into something sharp and unyielding. The gentle, accommodating Margaret was gone, replaced by a woman teetering on the precipice of a seismic shift. I had reached my limit. The line I had drawn on that legal pad was no longer just a conceptual division. It was a declaration of war, and I was ready to fight for every inch of my stolen peace, for every fragment of my shattered dignity. By the fifth day my house no longer felt like mine. The air, once crisp with the scent of pine and fresh lake breezes, was now thick with the cloying sweetness of stale food, the metallic tang of unwashed dishes, and a faint, indefinable odor of too many unconcerned bodies. Every surface bore the imprint of their casual occupation. Sticky fingerprints on my new countertops, water rings etched into the delicate finish of my end tables, a permanent film of grime coating the once gleaming kitchen floor. The beautiful cottage, my haven, my hard-won sanctuary, had been reduced to a chaotic communal space, a public lounge where personal boundaries were non-existent and respect was a forgotten concept. It was no longer a home. It was a testament to their unchecked entitlement, a monument to my own vanishing peace. The small, carefully curated objects that had filled my home with a sense of personal history and quiet charm were now casualties of their carelessness. A delicate ceramic bird, a gift from Robert, lay in pieces on the floor, swept carelessly from a shelf. My grandmother's antique lace doilies, once pristine, were stained with coffee and sticky juice. A favorite framed photograph, a cherished memory, was cracked, its glass shattered, relegated to a corner as if it were mere refuse. Even my old, out-of-tune piano had muddy footprints on its pedals. Each broken item was not just a material loss. It was a symbolic rupture, a small piece of my spirit being chipped away, carelessly discarded amidst the mounting wreckage. I would find myself staring at these small acts of destruction, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach, the physical manifestation of the emotional damage they inflicted. The noise, a relentless, oppressive blanket, was perhaps the most insidious form of torment. Laughter, once a joyous sound, now grated on my nerves, echoing with a hollow, taunting quality. Children, left largely unsupervised, shrieked and chased each other through the small rooms, their boundless energy leaving a trail of overturned furniture and scattered toys. Teenagers blasted their music at all hours, their earbuds apparently a concept foreign to their collective understanding, the heavy bass thrumming through the floorboards, vibrating through my very bones, denying me any semblance of quiet reflection. There was no escape, no corner where the relentless clamor could not penetrate, no moment of true silence to soothe my frayed nerves. The neighbors, usually so polite and understanding, began to notice. Subtle glances turned into hesitant conversations over the fence. "Everything all right, Margaret?" Mrs. Henderson asked one afternoon, her eyes darting nervously towards the caravan of parked vehicles and the overflowing trash cans. "Seems a little lively over there." Her voice was soft, but the underlying concern, the unspoken judgment, was clear. I mumbled vague assurances, a wave of shame washing over me. My carefully cultivated reputation for quiet dignity, for being a good neighbor, was unraveling before my very eyes, shattered by the very people who claimed to love me. When I tried tentatively to address the mounting expenses, the conversation invariably dissolved into dismissive laughter and hollow promises. "Mom, you worry too much," Melissa exclaimed, waving her hand dismissively when I gently mentioned the skyrocketing electricity bill. "We'll Venmo you later, of course," her cousin Ethan chimed in, a smirk playing on his lips, the words delivered with an air of theatrical generosity that felt utterly condescending. They treated my concerns as quaint, an amusing quirk of an overly anxious older woman. The very idea that they should contribute, that they should acknowledge the tangible cost of their presence, was met with a collective blank stare, followed by the same empty refrain. "Don't be silly, Mom. It's family. We'll take care of it." But taking care of it never meant payment. It meant a dismissive nod, a pat on the arm, and a quick change of subject, leaving me to shoulder the mounting financial burden alone. The indignity of it all was becoming unbearable. To be treated as a live-in maid, a free caterer, a silent, accommodating host, and then to be ridiculed for daring to mention the costs associated with their presence. It was a profound slap in the face. My indignation, which had started as a slow burn, was now a raging inferno within me. Each casual insult, each broken object, each dismissive laugh was chipping away at the last vestiges of my patience, hardening my resolve into something sharp and unyielding. The gentle, accommodating Margaret was gone, replaced by a woman teetering on the precipice of a seismic shift. I had reached my limit. The line I had drawn on that legal pad was no longer just a conceptual division. It was a declaration of war, and I was ready to fight for every inch of my stolen peace, for every fragment of my shattered dignity. The next morning, the dining table wasn't set for breakfast. It was set with 20 contracts. Gone was the usual chaotic spread they had come to expect. In its place, under the harsh light of the kitchen, lay a stark array of neatly stacked papers, each one a testament to my meticulously planned counteroffensive. My heart pounded, a drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady, my resolve unshakable. I had risen before dawn, fueled by a mix of anxiety and a cold, clear purpose, double-checking each document, ensuring every clause was legally sound. One by one, they trickled into the kitchen, their faces registering a mixture of confusion and mild irritation at the unexpected tableau. Melissa was first, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "Mom, what is all this?" she demanded, her voice etched with annoyance. Before she could touch a contract, a firm knock echoed from the front door. I walked slowly, deliberately towards it, my gaze unwavering as I met my daughter's questioning stare. Opening the door, I revealed Deputy Harris, his imposing uniform filling my small entryway, his presence an undeniable symbol of authority. His arrival sent a ripple of bewildered silence through the assembled family members. Deputy Harris stepped inside, his calm but firm voice cutting through the remaining whispers. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "I'm Deputy Harris. I'm here at the request of Ms. Margaret Collins, the homeowner." He gestured towards the dining table. "It appears there's been a misunderstanding regarding the terms of your stay. Ms. Collins has prepared an occupancy agreement for each of you." He picked up one of the contracts, his thumb tracing the bold print. "Each agreement outlines a charge of $140 per person per night for your lodging, plus a deposit to cover potential damages, and an itemized list of any expenses incurred for your extended stay. These terms are non-negotiable." The reaction was immediate, explosive. A stunned silence was quickly replaced by a furious cacophony of protests, shouts, and disbelieving laughter. "Are you serious, Mom?" Melissa shrieked, her face contorting with rage. "You're charging us? Your own family?" Ethan, always the loudest, bellowed, "This is insane. We're not signing anything. You'll die alone, Mom, if you treat your family like this." Deputy Harris raised a hand, his voice cutting through the noise. "You have two options. he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. You can sign these agreements, acknowledge the terms and pay the requested amounts. Or you can gather your belongings and vacate the premises within the hour. His eyes met mine, a silent acknowledgement of the difficult but necessary stand I was taking. Chaos erupted. Suitcases were dragged from rooms, bumping loudly down the stairs. Cousins began arguing, their voices escalating. Amidst the pandemonium, the hateful words flung at me were like poisoned darts. "You'll die alone." Ethan screamed again as he stomped past. I stood firm, my gaze sweeping across the faces contorted with anger and disbelief. My voice, when I finally spoke, was clear, steady, and edged with a calm irony. "Funny. I think this is the first time I've truly lived alone, and I like it." The storm raged around me, but inside I was finally, profoundly at peace. By sunset the vans were gone. The last squeal of tires on gravel, the last angry shout echoing through the trees, slowly faded into a blessed, profound quiet. The silence returned, not the strained, uneasy quiet of the previous days, heavy with unspoken tension, but a silence that felt utterly pure, a deep, cleansing calm that settled over the cottage like a soft, comforting blanket. It was not an empty silence, not the desolate void I had once feared, but a silence full of peace, rich with the quiet hum of my own heartbeat, the gentle rustle of leaves outside, and the soft lapping of the lake against the shore. My sanctuary, battered and bruised but ultimately reclaimed, breathed a sigh of relief, and so did I. I walked through the house, each step a reclamation. The lingering smell of stale food was replaced by the fresh scent of pine cleaner as I systematically, almost reverently, restored order. Every surface was wiped clean, every item carefully put back in its place. The delicate ceramic bird, now mended, sat proudly on its shelf. My grandmother's lace doilies were painstakingly laundered, laid out to dry in the sun. The muddy shoes scattered across the hallway were gone, the floor gleamed. The half-eaten donuts on the windowsill had vanished, the sill scrubbed clean. And in the bathroom, the smell of cheap cologne spilled over the sink was replaced by a fresh, clean scent. My old, out-of-tune piano stood undisturbed in the living room, no longer bearing the marks of careless feet. This wasn't just cleaning. It was a ritual of renewal, an act of infusing my home and myself with a renewed sense of sacredness and respect. In the days that followed, the transformation was profound. I redecorated with a renewed sense of purpose, not just for aesthetics, but to solidify the boundaries that had been so brutally tested. I planted vibrant flowers around the porch, each bloom a testament to resilience and beauty. The garden, once an afterthought, became a project of love, a living, breathing symbol of the growth and tranquility I was cultivating in my life. Most significantly, I commissioned a small, elegant sign for my front gate. It read, simply and unequivocally, "By appointment only." It wasn't meant to be hostile, but a clear, respectful declaration of my terms, a visual cue that this was a private residence, a space where entry required invitation and consideration. I also updated my property deed, adding a specific clause regarding guest occupancy, a legal reinforcement of my right to control my own space and the requirement of respect. It was a measure born not of bitterness but of wisdom, a preventative step to ensure that my boundaries would never again be so carelessly disregarded. This was not about punishing my family but about protecting myself, about safeguarding the peace I had worked so long and hard to achieve. It was a firm, compassionate assertion of my inherent right to dignity within my own home, a declaration that from now on respect was not just expected but legally enshrined. The experience, though painful, had been a profound teacher. It taught me that setting limits is not an act of cruelty, but an essential act of self-love and dignity. For too long, I had conflated flexibility with kindness, mistaking an absence of boundaries for an abundance of love. I had learned, in the crucible of their casual invasion, that true love, true respect, does not demand endless sacrifice, does not exploit generosity, and certainly does not disregard the sanctity of another's space. The "you'll die alone" taunt had dissolved into the wind. I was not alone. I was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely present with myself. That was my story, raw and unvarnished, a testament to the quiet power of standing firm. What about you? Have you ever had family or friends cross the line like this? Share your experience in the comments. I really want to know. And if this story spoke to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it. Respect isn't cruelty, it's just math. You give what you take or you leave. And for the first time in decades, the equation finally balanced in my favor.